Let's get honest for a second. You've been showing up. You've been texting first, forgiving quickly, making excuses for behavior you know doesn't align with your worth. Why? Because you care. You care deeply, and there's nothing wrong with that, except when it's one-sided. You've been caring more than he has. You've been invested while he's been inconsistent. You've been present while he's been distracted. But what happens when that stops? What happens when you stop caring? When your energy shifts from desperation to detachment, when your heart stops being available on demand and your time stops being taken for granted, that's when he starts to worry. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally remembered who you were before you tried to prove your worth. Here's the reality: people only value what they believe they could lose. When you're always available, always understanding, always forgiving, without accountability, there's no pressure, no urgency. But the second your energy pulls back, the second you stop trying to explain yourself, convince him, or win him over, that's when the panic begins. That's when he feels something he didn't feel before, the fear of losing you. You don't have to scream, you don't have to block or beg. All you need to do is stop handing your power over to someone who treats it like it's disposable. You shift the dynamic by shifting your energy, and when your care turns inward, toward your healing, your joy, your future, that silence, that absence, that detachment becomes deafening. When you stop reacting, stop texting first, stop initiating every conversation, and stop explaining yourself over and over again, something powerful happens. Your silence becomes louder than any words you could ever say. You don't need to announce that you've pulled back. You don't need to create a scene or give a long speech. The absence of your emotional presence speaks volumes on its own. He begins to feel something he hasn't felt in a while: uncertainty. And uncertainty, when someone's been used to your consistency, creates a jolt. He may not immediately understand what's changed, but he will feel it, because emotional energy is powerful, and when yours is no longer flowing in his direction, he notices the void. For so long, you may have been the one who held the emotional weight of the connection. You were always the first to reach out, the first to fix things, the first to soften your boundaries just to keep the peace. You thought that caring deeply meant keeping the relationship alive. But the truth is, it was only draining you. It's exhausting to keep showing up for someone who only shows up when it's convenient. And when you finally stop, when you get tired enough to fall silent, it disrupts the entire rhythm of the dynamic. Your emotional withdrawal doesn't come from bitterness, it comes from clarity. You realize that words aren't working anymore, that over-explaining is only being met with apathy, and that your presence has been taken for granted. So you pull back, not to manipulate, but to protect your peace. You start valuing your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being. And as you do that, he begins to feel the shift. Suddenly, the woman who always answered right away is no longer replying. The one who used to initiate conversations is now silent. The attention that once boosted his ego has disappeared, and that absence becomes louder than any argument. It's in that silence that he starts worrying. He wonders why you've gone quiet. He rereads old messages. He notices your online presence has changed. He senses that the emotional safety net he never had to ask for, but always counted on, is gone, and that unsettles him. Because while he may not have matched your care when you were giving it freely, he certainly felt the comfort of it. And now, with it gone, he's faced with a feeling he's not used to. Doubt about where he stands, doubt about whether you're moving on, doubt about whether he's lost something real. The most powerful part of this shift is that you don't have to perform it. You don't have to make noise, you simply allow your detachment to speak for itself. The energy he once took for granted is now a silence that echoes, and it's in that silence, that distance, that emotional withdrawal, that he finally starts to pay attention. Not because you told him to, but because he felt you stop caring, and nothing makes someone start worrying more than the loss of what they thought would always be there. When you constantly care, constantly give, and constantly show up, especially when it's not being matched, you unknowingly feed his ego. Every text you send first, every time you forgive without accountability, every time you make excuses for his behavior, you reinforce the idea that your love is guaranteed, that your emotional availability is endless, that no matter how he shows up or doesn't, you'll still be there waiting, giving, hoping, and that right there is what builds a sense of control in him. It's not conscious cruelty on his part, it's human nature. We all become desensitized to what we think is permanent, and when he feels that your care is permanent, he stops treating it as precious. The truth is, your care, your concern, your attention, these things are currency. They have value, but when you keep spending them on someone who doesn't invest back, you create an emotional imbalance, and the more you give without boundaries, the more you starve yourself while feeding his sense of security. He doesn't need to do anything differently because you've trained him to believe that your heart is available no matter what. But the second you stop, the very moment you stop pouring energy into him, he begins to feel it. Not in a dramatic way, not in a fight, but in the quiet lack of attention that once kept his ego inflated. When you pull back, you're no longer giving him the emotional fuel he's been silently relying on. The compliments stop, the check-ins stop, the energy that used to orbit around him begins to redirect, and in that space his ego starts to starve, because while he might not have responded to your care with equal depth, he was still feeding off it. He was still comforted by it. He still counted on your emotional presence to give him validation, even if he couldn't fully reciprocate. So when you stop caring, when you stop making him the center of your emotional world, he starts to feel the lack of praise, support, and attention, and it begins to chip away at his confidence. What's so powerful about this shift is that it doesn't require any performance or pretense. You're not withholding affection to play a game. You're reclaiming it because you finally understand its value. You've realized that your love is not cheap. Your energy is not free. Your heart is not a revolving door for someone to walk in and out of whenever it suits them. And once that realization takes root, your energy changes. You don't need to say a word. Your silence, your absence, your peace says everything, and that's when the worry sets in, because now he's not sure anymore. Not sure if you'll answer. Not sure if you're thinking about him. Not sure if he's lost access to the attention he once took for granted. You've stopped feeding his ego and the hunger that follows. That's where the fear begins. Not because you were cruel, but because you finally chose yourself, and that shift, quiet, strong, and unshakable, is what he never saw coming. Detachment is so often misunderstood. People hear the word and assume it means coldness, bitterness, or giving up. But real detachment, conscious detachment, is none of those things. It's not about building walls, it's about building clarity. It's not about shutting down emotionally. It's about deciding what you will and will not allow to disturb your peace anymore. When you've been overgiving, overthinking, and overextending for someone who doesn't match your energy, there comes a moment where you're simply done. Not from anger, but from wisdom. You no longer need to argue. You no longer need to explain. You no longer need to convince someone of your worth. That is what real detachment looks like. There's nothing dramatic about this kind of clarity. It happens in quiet ways. You stop responding to mixed signals because you finally understand that mixed signals are already a message. You stop trying to read into what he meant, or why he didn't call, or how you can fix something you didn't break. You stop holding space for someone who doesn't show up fully. This is not you becoming heartless. It's you realizing you have a heart, and it deserves more than confusion and inconsistency. And when that shift happens, you become clear in your energy, your boundaries, and your priorities. He may not understand it at first, but he will feel it. The way you detach matters. It's not revenge. It's not a tactic. It's healing. You stop caring not because you hate him, but because you finally love yourself more. That love shows up in the choices you make now. You choose peace over emotional chaos. You choose time with people who pour into you, not drain you. You choose quiet mornings, solo walks, inspired projects, and laughter that isn't tied to his presence. And that kind of emotional self-sufficiency isn't cold, it's magnetic, because your energy is no longer leaking everywhere. It's contained, powerful, centered. What he feels when you detach isn't just the absence of communication, it's the absence of control. He no longer has access to your emotions the way he used to. He no longer gets to feel like the center of your world, and that's not because you're punishing him, it's because you're honoring yourself. The clarity you now carry isn't about shutting the door on love. It's about closing the door on anything that doesn't meet you with the same level of depth, respect, and effort that you've always given. And that's what rattles him, because your detachment, your silence, your new comment's not laced with resentment. It's rooted in truth, a truth that says, I see things clearly now. I don't need to fight, I don't need to beg, and I definitely don't need to shrink to be chosen. That kind of clarity is rare, and once he feels it, once he sees that you've truly let go, that's when he starts to worry, because he knows deep down, you're not pretending. You've actually moved on from needing what you once thought you couldn't live without. There comes a moment when you no longer want to play the emotional games. You stop overanalyzing his every word. You stop checking if he's viewed your story. You stop adjusting your behavior to try to trigger a response. That moment, the one where you decide to stop participating in the cycle, is the moment the game begins to fall apart, because you're no longer reacting. You're no longer available for manipulation, for inconsistency, or for his half-efforts. And that choice to no longer play, that's what changes everything. He starts to notice something's different, even if you haven't said a word, because the rules he's been used to no longer apply. For so long, you might have believed that if you just loved him enough, if you just stayed patient, if you just kept trying to prove your worth, he'd finally show up. But what you were really doing was playing a game that kept you stuck in emotional survival mode. It was a game of waiting, hoping, explaining, chasing, and shrinking. But now, you've dropped the script. You've walked away from the board. You're no longer playing for his attention. You're playing for your own peace. And in doing that, the entire dynamic shifts. The comfort he once felt, knowing you'd always be there, begins to shake. When you stop trying to win him over, he starts to feel unsteady, because up until now, he's been the one with the emotional upper hand. He knew your patterns, he knew you'd reach out, he knew you'd be the one to fix things, to keep things going, but now you're calm, you're present, but distant, engaged with life, but not with him. He doesn't feel chased, and that unfamiliarity triggers uncertainty. He starts to wonder why you're no longer trying, why you've stopped reacting, why your energy has shifted. What rattles him the most isn't your silence, it's your indifference. When you stop playing the game, it becomes clear that the control he once had over your emotions no longer exists, and that loss of control forces him to feel things he never expected to feel: doubt, fear, maybe even regret. He can't manipulate what no longer reacts. He can't provoke what no longer responds, and that realization starts to worry him deeply, because when you stop playing the emotional game, he loses the emotional security he once took for granted. You're not doing this to teach him a lesson. You're doing this because you've finally remembered who you are without the drama. You've remembered that you don't have to fight to be valued, that the right love doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from alignment, mutual respect, and emotional maturity. You've outgrown the game entirely, and now, as he sits with the silence, with your absence, with the energy that once revolved around him now turned inward, he realizes something's changed. You're no longer playing, you're living, and that shift, that's what starts to scare him. When you stop over-explaining yourself, you stop handing out permission slips for how you feel. You stop trying to justify your standards, your expectations, or your emotional needs, and that's a powerful place to stand. Because in the past, you may have found yourself constantly needing to make your care understandable, your pain palatable, and your value digestible to someone who never truly intended to meet you there. But when you stop doing that, when you let go of the urge to keep making him see your worth, you begin to reclaim the space within you that was being rented out to validation. He may not have asked for all those explanations directly, but through his detachment, his inconsistency, his silence, he made you feel like your emotions needed to be negotiated, that if you just said the right thing or explained your feelings in the right way, he'd finally get it. But that constant explaining, that's what drains your power, because you're no longer speaking from clarity. You're speaking from the need to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. When you stop over-explaining, you send a quiet, unshakable message: I trust myself now more than I trust your response to me. He begins to feel that difference even if he can't name it. Your energy no longer carries desperation, urgency, or emotional pleading. You're not texting paragraphs, you're not trying to make things make sense, and you're no longer asking him to meet you halfway, because you've walked the other half yourself and saw he never planned to show up. That shift is internal, but it reflects in every interaction, or the lack thereof. You've made peace with being misunderstood if it means being free, and that kind of peace unsettles someone who is used to your emotional transparency as a way to keep control. The moment you stop explaining is the moment you stop negotiating with someone who was never listening in the first place, and that's when the fear sets in for him, because he knows your silence doesn't come from lack of words, it comes from strength. The strength of a woman who has nothing left to prove. A woman who no longer needs to explain why she's pulling back, why she's unavailable, or why she's focusing on herself. You're no longer reaching out to fix anything because you're no longer holding yourself responsible for the emotional imbalance. This change in you creates a vacuum, one he never expected. He relied on your words to ease his guilt, to keep the door open, to feel emotionally tethered. But now that door is closed gently, without anger, without explanation, and that is exactly what begins to disturb his comfort. You're not loud, you're not dramatic, you're just done, and there's nothing more powerful or terrifying than that kind of quiet confidence. When you shift your focus inward and stop making him the center of your emotional gravity, your entire energy field changes. No longer are your thoughts revolving around what he's doing, what he's thinking, or when he's coming back. You start to reclaim all that mental and emotional space that was once consumed by confusion and anticipation. And when that happens, something incredible begins. Your energy becomes grounded, magnetic, and untouchable. You're no longer seeking love, you're becoming it. You're no longer hoping for attention, you're commanding respect, and that kind of shift, it's deeply felt even in your absence. You start dressing differently, not for him, but for yourself. You speak with clarity, not to impress him, but because you know your voice matters. You begin to glow differently, not from validation, but from inner alignment, and people feel that, he feels that. Suddenly, you're not checking your phone for his name. You're too busy answering the call of your own potential. You're not posting to get his attention. You're creating, building, becoming. Your life becomes richer, fuller, more dynamic, not because he returned, but because you did. And that's when the real fear hits him, because now he's no longer sure he can reach you the way he once could. You're no longer reacting to his breadcrumbing or minimal efforts. You've elevated emotionally. Energetically, spiritually, you're tapped into something bigger than the relationship. You're tapped into yourself, and in that space of power, he begins to wonder, what happened? Where did she go? Why doesn't she need me anymore? That absence of need, the emotional gap where your attention once lived, becomes a mirror for him. A mirror that reflects everything he took for granted, everything he ignored, and everything he failed to value. And while he may try to pull you back in, whether through charm, apology, or sudden affection, you no longer respond to the surface level. You're not hungry for breadcrumbs, you're sitting at a table you built for yourself. The same emotional triggers he used to rely on no longer work, because your nervous system isn't in flight anymore. You're in peace, you're in power, and ironically, now that you no longer crave his focus, he starts to crave yours. Because the version of you who chases is gone, and the version of you who leads your own life, she's captivating. This final shift is not about winning, it's about rising. And when you rise, when your energy becomes centered and secure, he starts worrying not because you've become cold, but because you've become complete. That's what unsettles him, that's what wakes him up. Not your anger, not your pain, but your absence, not your silence, but your presence, fully turned inward, no longer directed at him. He doesn't feel entitled to your love anymore. He misses it, he longs for it. And the question that haunts him most isn't, what is she doing? It's, will I ever matter to her again? When you stop caring the way you used to, when you finally release the weight of constantly trying to be seen, heard, and chosen, you unlock a version of yourself that is clearer, stronger, and more rooted in truth than ever before. You no longer carry the burden of managing someone else's emotional growth. You step away from trying to decode silence or fix the unfixable. That freedom is not cold-hearted, it's healing. It's the kind of healing that comes when you realize your peace is far too precious to be traded for temporary attention. You're not giving up on love, you're giving up on self-neglect, and that distinction is everything. Throughout the journey, something powerful happens. The more you let go of the need to control or chase, the more powerful you become. You begin to take full ownership of your space, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You shift your focus inward, and with that shift, your energy becomes magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you're no longer seeking outside approval to validate your worth. That kind of calm, self-sourced confidence can't be faked, and it can't be ignored. He starts to feel the difference. He starts to notice the silence where there used to be emotional labor, and that's when the discomfort creeps in for him, not because you're being cruel, but because your absence echoes louder than your presence ever did. This entire transformation is not about revenge or tactics. It's about evolution. When you stop caring in the same old ways, it doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. It means you've stopped overgiving. You've stopped overthinking. You've stopped living in a place of lack. That shift rewires everything. Your behavior, your energy, your boundaries, and suddenly, what used to trigger you no longer moves you. What used to pull you in now pushes you to protect your peace. That's not bitterness, that's growth. And in that growth, you become unavailable to the same dynamics that once had power over you. For him, the unsettling part isn't just that you stopped calling, texting, or explaining. It's that you stopped needing. You stopped centering him in your world. You stopped giving him access to your energy. And when he feels that emotional disconnection, that's when the fear kicks in. Because for the first time, he realizes that you weren't dependent. You were willing, you chose him, you gave from a place of depth and heart. And now that you've pulled that love back, he's left wondering how he lost something he thought would always be there. So in the end, this journey isn't about making him worry. It's about finally prioritizing yourself. It's about letting go of emotional cycles that kept you stuck and stepping into a version of you that doesn't chase love but embodies it. That woman, the one who no longer overcares, overexplains, or overfunctions. She is powerful. She is free, and from that place of freedom, she no longer hopes for someone to choose her, because she already did. She chose herself, and that, more than anything else, is what makes him start to worry. Thank you so much for being here today, for showing up not just for this message, but most importantly, for yourself. It takes courage to look inward, to reflect, and to make shifts that put your peace and power first. If you've made it this far, I want you to know you're not alone on this journey. The moment you stop overgiving, overcaring, and start reconnecting with your own worth, that's the moment everything begins to change. Thank you for allowing this space to be a part of your growth. Your time, your energy, and your willingness to hear these words mean more than you know. Each time you choose yourself, you send a message to the world, and to anyone who ever took you for granted, that your value is not up for debate. Remember, you are allowed to walk away from anything that causes you confusion, depletes your spirit, or keeps you feeling small. You are powerful beyond measure when you return to yourself. And when you do that consistently, without anger but with clarity, the universe responds in ways you never imagined. If this message spoke to you, carry it forward, live it, breathe it. Don't just listen to these words, become them. That shift will not only transform how you see yourself, but how the world sees you, and those who once took your love lightly will begin to feel the weight of your absence. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate you. I believe in your strength, and I hope you continue walking this journey with love, wisdom, and unapologetic power. Until next time, take care of your energy, protect your peace, and never forget, the moment you truly choose you, the game changes. Goodbye for now, and stay grounded in your worth.